Good afternoon, everyone. So today I'm going to give an outline slash timeline of stages and details of my power of attorney journey with my father's specific healthcare hardships due to several strokes caused by COVID-19. And I'm going to really highlight what exactly happened from December 2020 to December 2021. And I have written a list of some of the main points and resources that I use during each step of the way. And I'm also going to share a slideshow of his progression over the past year just to give you some visuals to back up what I'm saying so you can have a better idea of what exactly happened. So I'm going to just look at my computer so I can read off some of the highlights because I took notes every step of the way in regards to dates and conditions and locations, physicians, or any healthcare professional. So let's jump right in. So I'm going to just give a brief overview of some of the main points and things that occurred. And I'm going to start with the beginning. So December 5th, 2020, I was notified by my mom to reach out to my dad and see what's going on. She was worried. So December 4th, I actually spoke to my dad on FaceTime and he was helping someone move. And just to give you some background information, he was working in a manufacturing environment. He was 49 years old and very, very fit, no pre-existing health issues, and never been hospitalized. So on December 5th, when I reached out to the hospital, they notified me that my father was extremely sick. And he was on several forms of life support, and they're running tests and trying to get his organs started back up. And just to keep in mind that he's very, very sick. And, a lot of the doctors I've learned that they don't really show any empathy. It's kind of like very straightforward, direct, which I understand because they do this all the time. So moving forward, I want to say we gave it about 4 days and they told me that he was in a neurointensive care unit. He had swelling in the brain and he had suffered from several strokes in the brain in major parts of his brain. So these strokes were due to COVID. COVID affects everyone's body differently. COVID can cause blood clots to form in your body. So in his case, they told me that the blood clots were sent from his heart to his brain and they had no hope or judgment that he would ever regain consciousness or have the ability to do anything but breathe again in life. So this was a very abrupt situation that occurred, and it was a lot. I was studying undergrad, electrical engineering major, senior, and I want to say this was final seasons of my first semester. So this is around December, first semester. So moving forward, I was given the crazy decision to make of whether or not I wanted to pull the plug and allow my dad to pass peacefully and take him off of all forms of life support, or place a trach in to allow him to have long-term ventilation. Because I think after 2 weeks, you're not really supposed to be on life support without the trach and everything because it can cause a lot of infections and issues. So every day I got a phone call from a healthcare professional, doctor, or physician reminding me of this decision that needed to be made. And they stated that I needed to think about the quality of life that my father would have and what did he want. And unfortunately, we never really had this conversation. So it wasn't something that was an easy decision for me to make. I spent a lot of time praying about it and trying to search for discernment. Before the new year of 2021, I actually decided to place the trach in. And I didn't just make this decision on my own. I prayed about it. I discussed it with his mom. His mother is 89 years old. So during this time, I also forgot to tell you that I was actually determined legally next to kin. And the reason being, my father had no other kids above the age of 18, as well as he was not married. So my father and my mom separated back when I was 3 years old. So he's not married and he didn't have the ability to advocate and communicate for himself, that's when your eldest child above the age of 18 is automatically determined as legally next to kin. It only kind of gets kind of complicated when you have multiple children, especially when people kind of want to take charge and then you have kind of a mess. So that also affects gaining power of attorney if you don't already have that assigned prior to anything occurring. So moving forward, I got the trig put in, and I want to say December 30th, the trig was put in. So from December 5th to December 30th, he was on life support, and I was calling every day, checking in, logging this information. Whoever I'm speaking to, I'm logging the date, the time, and whoever I'm speaking with. So I think, let me look at the timeline at the same time. So in February, he said his first words, which were just yes or no. And we started him on amantadine, and it makes people more interactive. So that was the goal there. And it actually was pretty beneficial. And then in February, the trig was removed. Actually, February 8th, it was removed. So on February 8th, the trig was removed, and February 10th to February 16th, he was placed in a nursing facility. So this is facility number 1. And at this nursing facility, he obtained a stage 4 bed sore that was 3 inches in diameter and circular. This is just some details that I wrote, I assume. And it was devastating. He was placed on a long-term ventilator. And at this point, I didn't really have any prior knowledge to anything in healthcare, nursing facilities, or anything regarding bed sores. Because I hear the term sore and I think of, a scar of some sort, but I don't think I was necessarily aware of the extent of how awful and bad things can get due to a bed sore. So February 12th, I began looking at power of attorney and considering it and thinking about different ways to obtain it. So during this time, not only was I looking at power of attorney, but I was also looking at guardianship as an option as well, because guardianship is also something that you could utilize to make decisions on behalf of a loved one, family member, if you do not have power of attorney. So unfortunately, during this time, he wasn't really able to recognize me, hold a conversation, or consent and demonstrate that he could understand and that he was cognitive. So I was considering power of attorney, understanding what it meant and how to get it, but I knew that it wasn't something I could try to obtain at that moment in time. So of course, during this time, I'm still checking in. I typically called at least every 4 hours, regardless if he was hospitalized or in the facility, to just check to see how he was doing. And I would log, his vitals, if anything was going wrong, if he was communicating, if he was awake. But just to give you some more information, between December and February, he was completely unconscious. So I'm communicating with him, not getting a response. He was unable to make eye contact, engage, follow commands, respond. But this is what they predicted. So it was kind of disheartening to watch. And I kind of approached that situation to communicate with him like everything was fine. So I'm having normal conversations, updating him about my life, telling him that I think he looks great. I think he's doing great. And just saying positive and encouraging things without getting a response every day for 2 months straight. And I want to say around February 17th through March 17th, he was in ICU, back in the hospital due to that one bed sore. So now we have refocused our energy to caring for him from a perspective of infection due to the bed sore, in addition to the brain issues and him being considered a traumatic brain injury patient. So I decided to create a video of 30-second clips with words of encouragement from family and friends. And I want to say also in March, he started mumbling his birthday and name. So just to give you a better vision of the progress that was made. And during this time, I was like hoping that I could get power of attorney. Every time we had progress, I'm like, ooh, can I do it? But seeking power of attorney, you kind of have to pay an attorney for their time as well as the service that they're providing. So it's kind of expensive. And I didn't want to risk having an attorney come and going through the process and he was not capable to fulfill those requirements of number one, consenting to the fact that he understood what a power of attorney was and he was okay with me being power of attorney. Moving forward, the next facility comes about, but it wasn't easy. Between February and March, about a month, we applied. And when I say we, the social worker at the hospital and I applied to about 57 facilities in Virginia. And it was really hard to find placement because this is kind of a bizarre case. He went from being completely mobile, completely healthy, to not being able to do much for himself and not so good of a healthy state. So I think that a lot of facilities look at you not having any type of private insurance and the level of care that's needed, and they're immediately responding with no, especially if you've had a trach put in, life support. And just to give you also more information, a lot of facilities that are accepting public health care and you don't have any private health care opportunities or access, they do not typically accept patients that are utilizing any type of life support because that requires more equipment in their building and more monitoring. So he wasn't able to find placement until after the trach was removed. So just to let you know that information as well. So during this time, of course, since he had brain injuries, things weren't typical. They weren't quote unquote normal at all for him as well as me. So he began doing this thing called neurostorming and posturing back in December as well. And I think that lasted through April. So December through April, he was posturing and neurostorming. And neurostorming is and posturing is something that occurs to your body when you have a lot of brain injuries and your body is kind of trying to fight it and cope with the new changes as well as heal. So the neurostorming looked like him sweating and staring out into space a lot. And he had increased heart rate and blood pressure issues. So the posturing was more of a kind of a full body or like spasm. So moving forward in between March to July, he was at another facility. So he moved to facility number 2. And just to give you some insight, when a patient is in a place where these bed sores are accumulating and occurring, it's not due to someone not having the ability to move, because if we think back to what I stated earlier, December to February, he was in the hospital. That's 2 months, no bed sores. He went to facility number 1 for, I want to say, 6 days, less than a week, and he had a stage 4 bed sore. And that is only due to neglect and abuse. So during that time is when I first found out about legal aid ombudsman and what role that they play. And honestly, when you're dealing with a facility that does have these issues, it's typically not just you. It's other people in the facility dealing with the same issues. So the legal aid ombudsman was completely familiar with every healthcare professional in the facility, as well as names and roles and what needs to be done and what doesn't need to be done. But honestly, since he was there for such a short period of time, there was no time to correct any actions because they were just that life-threatening when you are dealing with abuse and neglect. Moving forward, after facility number 1, he actually received a lot of physical therapy and range of motion while being hospitalized, even though he wasn't cognitive and he wasn't able to communicate or express himself or follow commands or anything like that. He was getting range of motion, and in February he was definitely getting physical therapy. So moving forward, in April, he actually was placed in a facility, the only one out of 56 that accepted him. And facility number 2 actually had a pretty good experience until he was placed on a different hall, which means he had different healthcare professionals taking care of him. So during the first half of his stay in April at facility number 2, he actually had he was visited by a speech therapist and he began swallowing and eating by mouth. So he didn't speak actually his first 2 weeks at this facility. And I was told that when you're going through a lot and you have brain damage, it's typically you getting used to your environment. So it was different for me because he did, gain the ability to communicate. Maybe not with the correct response time back in February, but definitely the ability to communicate and respond. So that was huge. And he was in extreme pain from that one bed sore that he obtained in 6 days. So this actually caused him to be in such excruciating pain that it was really difficult for me as his like as his next to kin and supporter and caretaker, that it would be so hard for me visiting to see him in that kind of pain. That bed sore caused so much pain that I could hear him in the parking lot screaming. Anytime they repositioned him, moved him at all, it was him screaming to the top of his lungs. And during this entire visit at the second facility, he was suffering from the first stage 4 bed sore. And I wasn't really sure if there was anything else I could do because I mean, typically when you report a facility for neglect or abuse, they just solve the fact that you're not there anymore, or they try to correct the actions while you are there. But thankfully, he didn't have to go back. And at this second facility, unfortunately, I had to deal with the aftermath, and I felt awful. I had to listen to him scream to the top of his lungs anytime they repositioned him, set him up in his bed to feed him, or anything like that. And I could literally hear him in the facility outside in the parking lot. It was devastating. It wasn't a fun feeling. And, watching him go through all of these stages due to the aftermath of the strokes, and it was definitely hard, but I always decided to have a smile for him and encourage him, give him words of wisdom to make sure that he understands that he's doing great. You're doing fine. Everything's great. Everything's fine. You're doing well. You're looking better and better every day. And regardless if I was getting a response or not, this was my attitude coming in. And moving forward during his second half of the stay at this facility, facility number 2, he actually received a lot of neglect. During the second half of his stay at facility number 2 was a lot of neglect. And it was so bad that employees at the facility reached out to me anonymously to let me know that I should probably start seeking some legal documentation about the care that he's receiving. And yes, this was alarming, but also it solidified something that I already kind of knew because at this point, he's been here for a few months and I've already established relationships. I've already become familiar with what needs to be done and what doesn't need to be done. And over time, regardless of the neglect and abuse, you have signs that kind of show you. So some of the signs that you kind of look for is his capabilities decreasing, if that's engagement, communication, if it's him not eating or loss of weight, things like that. So I actually noticed a lot and learned a lot from this facility in regards to resources, neglect, abuse, etc. So I'll talk about that later. So some of the things that happened that was positive at this facility was he was set up, he tolerated it really well. But some of the things that were worst of all is he didn't get range of motion for the first time. So this is, I want to say April, yeah, April. So he had already gone from December through April with range of motion, didn't really have any stiffness really or contractions. So at this facility, he didn't get any range of motion. So his body became more and more in the fetus position, as well as more contractions and stiffness. So that will kind of help you understand why he's in the state that he's in now. So His mental status was actually reevaluated after he was hospitalized from the neglect and abuse from facility number 2. So this hospitalization was from August to October. And of course, the reasoning for this again is due to not finding placement, facilities not accepting him, due to him accumulating 14 bed sores from facility number 2. And luckily, I did have resources that could assure that he never returned to this facility again. And with that being stated, it's going to be hard to find placement again because now he has more issues than he had initially. So this time we applied to over 60 facilities within Virginia, DC, and Maryland, and none of them accepted him for such a long period of time. And during this time, I'm still communicating with United Healthcare professionals and care coordinators and directors and the Department of Rehabilitation, Aging and Rehabilitation Services. So really big meetings and trying to see if there was any way possible we can go through an appeal process or anything like that to get him in a better facility so we don't have to deal with these issues anymore. But of course, none of those went through, and he ended up getting accepted to another facility that was public health care supported. And thankfully, I actually obtained my first full-time position with health insurance. And I tried to put him on there to see if I can like open opportunities for him. But I was told that only your spouses and kids can go on your healthcare insurance. And it didn't qualify even if they were a dependent as a parent and you took care of them and claimed them as a dependent, they still didn't qualify. So this was all learning information. And moving forward, he ended up being accepted by another facility similar to the first two. And I'm actually working on unraveling and navigating this third facility. So facility number 3, I'm not sure what's worse and what's not worse, but at this point, he has contractions. During the hospitalization between August and October, he was actually reevaluated by neurologists that stated that he was very sharp. His mental status was top tier, and he was no longer considered a TBI patient because of how cognitive he was. His response times got better. He's now able to chew and communicate and engage, and he remembers everything. So it was kind of like communicating with him as normal, but he just was lacking the mobility part. So during that hospitalization, it was actually confirmed that not only is he not a TBI patient, but he's also considered solely a post-stroke patient, and he has the ability to live a better quality of life. So this was all great news. And the reason being is they thought that because of his brain being so much better, he had the ability to get physical therapy, but he would have to get Botox injections to loosen up the contractions so he can have a fair shot. Botox injections are an out-of-patient service, so he couldn't receive them while being hospitalized. That was the only downfall. So knowing that, I got a referral stating that, Botox injections would help. He would be able to get physical therapy and have a better quality of life. So it took about 3 appointments with neurologists and trying to land one and be able to get him there so that he can move forward in obtaining Botox injections. But it didn't happen until January 19th of 2022. So from, I want to say October to January, I've been making appointments, and every time the appointment came up, he was probably hospitalized from neglect or abuse, or yeah, that was it. Actually, every time he was hospitalized until recently. And I was so thankful that he made it. So he actually didn't land an appointment with a neurologist successfully until January 19th, 2022. So from October to January, I had made appointments and notified whichever facility or hospital. And unfortunately, it couldn't get done due to him being hospitalized because it is an outpatient service that is done by a neurologist, that it just couldn't happen. So I kind of trusted the process. It was kind of frustrating, but he finally was able to go, and it was approved to be funded by public health care. So that was a plus. During that hospital visit, though, from August to October, I was threatened by the hospital that if I didn't say yes to any facility that accepted him, he would they would kick him out, and I would have to pay out of pocket, all these things to try to get me to consent to any facility, regardless of the ratings and everything. So that was a lot, but luckily I had a lot of people and relationships and resources that I had found to help me throughout that process. And unfortunately, it did get to a point where if you're okay and you're in the hospital, they kind of force you out because you're taking up a bed where someone else actually needs care that can't be given anywhere outside of the hospital. So he was accepted to facility number 3. And I am dealing with facility number 3 at this moment in time. And it's not, I actually think that this may be the worst, but maybe it's not. I can't really compare anymore. So he was actually on his second hospitalization. And this time I'm actually going to make sure I do whatever I can to ensure that he doesn't return. So he's accumulated from 14 to 22 bed sores. It's been unethical dealing with healthcare providers that don't even bother to check his chart or know anything about him. So now I'm going to move forward to share kind of how I dealt with this and managed it. And I'm willing to accept any type of resources or suggestions or advice, recommendations, etc. And I'm going to move forward and give some background information and touch on the specific hardships and specific resources that I use to kind of navigate and manage those hardships. So there is limited to no opportunities for private healthcare insurance support as a minority and a male who suffered from several strokes due to COVID. This is most likely going to be my last video on this topic. So I want to share as many details as possible regarding each hardship, just to assure that everyone's getting the opportunity to learn from this as well as understand. So a lot of people believe that, they're the only one going through certain situations. This is an extremely difficult process to navigate to maintain your own life while caring for a loved one. So a lot of people, when they go through things, they always kind of assume that maybe they're the only one going through something, but that's not true. And I always knew that. But this shines a lot of light on, how thankful and blessed people really are just to have the ability to move, live, and make their own choices and have the ability from a cognitive perspective to make their own choices. But I tend to stray away from comparing individual strengths and weaknesses as well as successes due to something big being small to me. It could be little to someone else and vice versa. So I hope that this video portrays the reality of public health care as a minority and a male with no opportunities to private healthcare insurance to obtain healthcare that is deserved. First thing first, he has not received any physical therapy since February. And this is such a crucial piece because it really is important for your body to move. Regardless of your state, you need to at least move around, even if you're in the bed. So that's kind of something hard to maneuver because, at first the brain was an issue and now it's the mobility aspect. The mobility aspect would have been preventable without the neglect, abuse, 22 bed sores, etc. So now I'm going to just talk about the different resources that I use to deal with everything in regards to the neglect and abuse. And I'm going to start with facility number 2 since facility number 1 was such a short stay. So, and also I'm going to be looking at my notes at the same time. So facility number 2, my father's brain received a lot during this time. Facility number 2 was definitely detrimental due to the 14 bed sores that it resulted in at the end of the stay. But most importantly, he did have a lot of recovery from a brain perspective where I was able to obtain power of attorney and he was able to vouch and consent to his understanding as well as him giving me the green light to make his medical decisions and be my medical directive. Moving forward, power of attorney actually opens a lot of doors in regards to resources and advocacy for him because being legally next to kin, it doesn't really grant you much other than just the yes or no over the phone or face to face to a healthcare professional. You can't really obtain records with legally next to kin. You really need power of attorney. So moving forward, facility number 2. So the abuse looked a lot like his TV being smashed, no AC throughout the entire summer, losing 60 pounds from not being fed. And at this time, he was actually on a feeding tube. So his teeth wasn't being brushed, he wasn't given any water. And I actually had to get Adult Protective Services involved this go round. And what the Adult Protective Services did was take the information and determine whether or not they're going to do intake. They also decide to visit the facility. They can do it anonymously or not, but they are able to visit the facility just to witness some things. And they don't have to schedule an appointment. It's kind of a random thing. And they determine whether or not they want to do an investigation. The investigation looks like, gathering records and actually taking the time to spend time to analyze whether or not they think any neglect or abuse has occurred due to statistics and medical records and everything like that. The investigation occurred and it actually resulted in a yes to neglect and abuse. So, being as though this occurred, it actually granted the wish of my father not ever being able to return to this facility, which was amazing because if it wasn't for that Adult Protective Services investigation and closed case to neglect, after the hospitalization, they would have returned my father to this facility. So I was really, really thankful for that. And also something to keep in mind that it really is disheartening, knowing that, healthcare professionals, number one, and these facilities don't have the time to care for the individuals, but also it seems like they're lacking the sympathy and the empathy and the ability to carry out their responsibilities and duties. Also, following the legal documentation, I also had the legal aid ombudsman on board prior to even reaching out to the Adult Protective Services. Unfortunately, he did become septic during this neglect and abuse. That's typically what it leads to. So this is the second time that I've experienced this at this point at facility number 2 is after a certain amount of neglect and abuse, it's only so much your body can sustain before being septic. And I think during that time, I actually requested that he was hospitalized. He never obtained range of motion at this facility whatsoever. And August to October, when he was hospitalized and he got the green light to having a better quality of life and next steps to progress, he actually wasn't able to progress because we weren't able to find any kind of placement for a new facility. So I had to move him from one state to another. And this was the only facility that accepted him within 3 states. So the reason that they told me that he wasn't being accepted is because of the medical record, the medical history, just seeing a patient that has gone through as much as he's gone through in such a short period of time. They're kind of looking at it like, that's a lot. You don't have private healthcare insurance. That's a no. And also they don't know to what level has he progressed. So I think during that time, he actually was no longer, actually, he did have a feeding tube, but he was breathing on his own. He was cognitive. So it was really hard for me to understand because I felt like there had been so much progress made. So during the first month of his new facility, he was never turned or repositioned. He laid on the same part of his body in the same exact way the entire time. And I spoke to the director of nursing and medical director, et cetera, to kind of try to get some insight and understanding why this isn't occurring. And unfortunately, I have I have no idea why, but he's accumulated 21 bed sores, and this is the facility 3 that he is now hospitalized due to. And I've submitted 12 Office of Healthcare Quality forms. And I really don't understand. The facility has lacked all type of senses of urgency for anything. I have held several care plan meetings with a legal aid ombudsman, director of nursing, medical director, and more. And at this point, it's like it can never return because there has been no corrective actions whatsoever. So it started with the no repositioning, brought it to the director of nursing's attention, didn't really say much. So I got a legal aid ombudsman. I've had a legal aid ombudsman for November, December, January. So November of 2021, December of 2021, and January of 2022. So we've held about 3 meetings and nothing really came out of that. He was hospitalized once before the current situation. And during that hospitalization, he was actually told by the doctor in the hospital that he has to have his suprapubic catheter replaced every 4 weeks to avoid infection. I relayed that back to the nursing home and held a care plan meeting with the legal aid ombudsman. And apparently the doctor said it wasn't a great idea. So dealing with that and moving forward, they suspect that the reasoning for his current situation and infection is due to the suprapubic catheter that the facility refused to swap and change and monitor and keep up with. So moving forward, the first issue at this facility was the repositioning. The second issue was weight loss, and the weight loss was insane. So he actually made progress in some way, shape, or form. His feeding tube actually was removed, and that was one pro and positive thing that came out of this facility number 3. I have never really seen a place where, the healthcare professionals didn't see an issue with the weight loss when I brought it to their attention. I requested to speak to the dietitian. The dietitian told me that there was nothing that could be done and kind of left it at that. And I kind of was advocating for hospitalization during this time, but they decided to take tests and not see anything. And I assume they never ever saw the cognitive decline and him becoming lethargic and more. So I ended up bringing it to their attention again 2 weeks later, where things started declining quickly. And I told them that I was concerned. And the charge nurse told me that there was nothing that they thought needed to be done about his current condition. As things were worsening, my father began not even recognizing me and not being able to communicate, keep his eyes open, and very, very confused. And I told the director of nursing as well as the charge nurse, and the charge nurse told me that the only way that he could be hospitalized is if I called 911. So this was my first experience calling 911, which granted him to hospitalization for a second time. And now I'm going to refer to my list again to share some of the new resources that I've come across that I'm looking into. So the Oversight Committee regarding quality of care in nursing facilities, which is due to some of the complaints and legal forms that I put in, about 10 to 12 forms just due to neglect and abuse. And the State Protection Advocacy Center, which is the Disability Law Center, and I'm sure they have them in every state. And also, there's a way to file complaints against licensed providers that are providing neglectful or unethical care. And in addition to that, the Department of Health Professions is typically where you would go to look for something like that. And disability rights of whichever state. So those have been super, super helpful. And I'm learning a lot in regards to malpractice attorneys. So that's what I'm looking to at this point, because when he's hospitalized, I kind of have a lot of time to do all of this extra research so that I'm not kind of focused on making sure that I'm present so that I can know that he's eating so that I can feed him myself. It's definitely a lot of weight to not only support, but micromanage an entire facility. So at least I'm pretty confident that in the hospital, they're going to feed him all 3 meals. They're going to have to reposition him and tend to the wounds. And the goal right now is just to monitor his current infection while he's hospitalized and try to support him and lift him up. from a words of encouragement standpoint to just be his sole sort of support, in addition to reaching out to all of these resources that I recently came across, just to do as much as I can to assure that we don't run into this issue anymore and to look forward to getting him those Botox injections. And I'm not sure if I highlighted this fact, but another reason why it was really hard to accept the delay in mobility due to Botox injections and the inability to get Botox injections is just because after moving to another state, you have to apply for that state's insurance. And when I applied back in November, a few months ago, the facility actually took about 2 months to submit the application. So unfortunately, he didn't have the ability to get the Botox injections also due to the fact that the facility failed to submit the paperwork. So that was a hard pill to swallow, but I think everything happens in perfect timing. I'm trusting that and praying about it. But in conclusion, these are all my efforts to keep my father alive, essentially. And unfortunately, the only progresses that mostly occur is in the hospital. From the brain perspective, it's happening very miraculously. And from a mobility perspective and actual physical state, it's just neglect, which is hard to imagine and accept because typically those issues cause infection, sepsis, and several stage 4 bed sores. And unfortunately, he is now back in the hospital. And it's just a lot, but definitely will say that there are a lot of people dealing with issues and, it doesn't stop life. I still have to live life. I still have to take care of myself. And I do believe that, you have to be there for your family members and support them in any way that you can. And that's what I'm trying to do is exercise all of my resources available just to know in my heart that I tried my best. And knowing that he gave his best efforts and recovery to have a better quality of life. So my father is honestly a trooper. He's super strong. I mean, stuff like this is definitely a miraculous story. And I think that he's living a legacy. And I hope that some of this information is helpful. And I hope that you can learn from something that I've provided and it gives you some insight if you are someone taking care of a loved one, a parent, a friend, from a medical perspective, a healthcare perspective, and just knowing that you really have to be present. You really have to be there. You have to build those relationships, utilize all of your resources available, and also make sure you're being a good secretary and logging in that information so that you can refer back to it later is super, super important. But thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys soon.
to know where I'm at.
What you turning? 21. Try again. 50. Yes, you are. There you go. Talk to him nice. Is that as far you can go? Can you go any higher? Alright, put her down now. Put her down. There you go. Love you too. Oh. Happy birthday! Say something to the people.
What's going on? My birthday today.
Yes, sir. Guess how old you are? 24. Try again. Try again.
20.
How about 50? Birthday to you. Happy birthday. Happy birthday Say what's up. Can you put your arm up today? Uh-oh. Don't work too hard. You did it. You can put it down now. What's up? Say what's up. Put your arm up. Can you do it today? Oh yeah. Talk to him nice. Talk to him nice. Yo. Hey, one more time. Where's the wisdom for the people?
Rise up and keep your head up.
If you don't do nothing else, right? Okay, we see you. I am watching it.